folks, I am Rob the Dungeon Tutor, and today we're going to be tackling a subject that comes up a lot of times from a lot of different people, and this is going to be kind of a catch-all, so if some of the stuff doesn't apply to you or isn't helpful to you, just skip on. Hopefully we'll find something that will be. But this is the basic question: how do you game master successfully? And this is, of course, for new people. If you already know how, this may be of limited use, but there may be some things to think about that might actually enhance your own levels of experience and your approach to game mastering. So, let's begin. First of all, I'm going to get by all of the basic things like, do you want to be a game master? Hopefully you do, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this. Do you want to entertain your friends? Do you want to make sure they have the best experience possible? If you don't, why are you game mastering? It's kind of implicit that you're kind of doing this so that everybody can have a good time. And if you're not doing it for that purpose, I don't know that I'm going to be able to help you conjure up a love for the hobby. But if you really do want to help other people and you really do want to do this, these are going to be things that will be very helpful for you. So, number one is accept what the role is. And the role of Game Master is a variety of hats that you wear over the course of the experience and outside of the experience that ensures or at least gives you the best chance of running a successful game. And some of that is in practice and some of that is in preparation. So first of all, we're going to go with preparation. So, to be a Game Master means having a certain amount of preparation. Does this always mean that you've written down the entire adventure and studied everything? No. But it does mean a couple things that you should do before you get into a game that will help things in the long run. Number one, know the rules. Have at least an idea of the game that you're running. If you haven't read the rule book, at least know the core elements of it. And reading the rule book is always going to be a plus. Studying the rule book, highlighting pertinent areas, writing notes for yourself on things not to forget when you're actually in the practice of gaming. Not a bad thing, all things considered, but that may be going a little too far for a lot of people. So, know at least enough of the rules that you can get by in the game. Now, if you're going to allow your players to create characters, you should look over character creation and the rules you're going to use, because many games these days may have multiple optional rules that you can select from to customize the game to the way you want to play it. So, at least knowing that can be very useful. Knowing how the combat and the way that you determine the outcome of different circumstances is vital. And if you don't know the core rules of the game, you're going to have a rocky road, especially if any of the other players do, and they're going to call you on your lack of knowledge. So, know the game. You don't even need to be the person who knows the game the best, but you should at least know the core, the basic principles that you're going to be using again and again and again to resolve situations in the game. One of the hats we Game Masters wear is that of the referee, and if you don't have a grasp on the rules, your role of referee is compromised, and it can lead to uneven gameplay. It may lead to a certain lack of trust by your players. So being cognizant of the rules is usually a good idea. Now, if you don't understand the rules or you have a hitch in your understanding of them, then, that's a good idea to maybe look for outside help, like contacting your friendly local dungeon tutor, but looking at a variety of videos and rereading the material, things like that, can be really, really useful. The good news is in almost every game system, the rules for the game generally can be boiled down to what's found in about 8 pages in any rule book. A lot of the rest of it is filler, fluff about the world, maybe details about other aspects that don't come up as often, but the core crunch of the game is usually about 8 pages long in any role-playing game, if even that. And once you understand that core concept, you can consolidate it down to what makes it go. You're probably going to be okay. And if during a game you have a lapse in your understanding, you can work after the game to fill in and maybe even tell your players, hey, the way I did this kind of bothered me. I looked it up. We were wrong. Going forward, we'll do it this way. Or maybe you'll like your rule better. Who knows? All the important thing is that you feel confident enough to be able to do your basic job as referee. Secondly, prepare what kind of experience you want to give for your players. Do you want to just grab an adventure path off the rack, read through it, and now you have an adventure design? Cool, certainly a popular option. If you're just getting into a game, maybe looking for one of these starter sets, like I've got plenty of behind me, and that'll give you an adventure, maybe some pre-generated characters, maybe some pretty dice, but the basic things that you need in order to run the game. It may even give you the best way of getting into a particular game that you're interested in, because a lot of those materials are written for somebody who's never played the game before, like you, for instance. And if there is any kind of a problem that just reading lines and lines and paragraphs and pages of text, if you're not the kind of person who really likes a dry analytical approach to rules, and not all of them do this, but if you want something that's a little bit more hand-holdy, something that's a little more conversational, something that is written with the idea of giving somebody a hand up and into the game, a lot of times those starter sets are designed that way. Not always, but oftentimes. And that can be really, really handy. For those who are a bit older in experience, it would be like the difference between the red box Dungeons & Dragons way back in the day, like 1980, to the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons manual, which was much more complicated. It is something to help bring you into the game easily without freaking you out about all the possibilities and all the details the full game has. So, once you have something in your hands, you can apply the rules that you know to understanding the game itself. Doing this in reverse order will give you something pretty to read, maybe with some nice art and something that's evocative, but without the core rules to understand and put the framework into some sort of a skeleton that you can go forward with. You're going to have to reread it again afterwards once you know the rules and how to put everything together. So, I recommend, again, getting some sort of a starter set possibly, or at least giving yourself time to read and absorb as many of the rules as you're going to need, and then getting some sort of adventure. Now, if you want to write your own, you have a story in your head, you want to do it, that's cool. Even if you do that, maybe take a look at a sample adventure or watch somebody's playthrough so you have an idea of how the adventures are structured. Oftentimes, the rules of a game are designed in such a way that a particular style of engagement with it is optimal. And that can be short encounters that kind of take away resources and give players a wide variety of opportunities in a small theater, or maybe it's something that's a lot more open and an encounter can flow from situation to situation to situation, changing the aspects and creating dynamic challenges for the players. It all depends on the game you're going to play and the style you want to play. And at this point, you don't have a style yet. All you know is what you're looking at. So, that's certainly something to look at, is the published materials or something that somebody has done to just give you some ideas on how you want to go forward with it. And then once you've got that, then you can start building a chrysalis for your adventure, but we'll cover that in another video. For now, we're just going to go forward with you have the content that you're going to use for your players. And again, this is for first-time game masters, so it's easy to overdo it. But that's why those starter sets are so useful, because they're compressed, they're compacted, they have what you need in one simple box and no more. After that, you have to go out and buy all the extra materials, right? So, all right. So, in preparation, you've got this, the idea down, you've got the game that you want to run. What else do you really need? Well, in my case, I make a control sheet, which means I have a piece of paper with all the characters' names on them, so that I can identify who is who. And I can call people by name, and that really does help to make people get into the role of their characters. If other people are addressing them as their characters, that can be a really useful little tip, but it's a nice one. Otherwise, if you already know everybody, it's easy to talk to people by their name, but if you want to immerse them in your game, start using their characters' names instead. And when you have the list of characters, the way that I run a control sheet is that I just draw a line, and then when the game starts, if it's a game that uses initiative, like Dungeons & Dragons, I just put their initiative order right down on the sheet, and then I keep notes of the different monsters, and I put their initiative right next to their name so that I can just look, and when I start a new combat, I just draw a line and do it again. This is very basic organization. It works for me. You might want to go with something a little bit more sophisticated. There are pre-printed GM control sheets out there that work for a variety of games, and that might be more to your taste. It might be a little bit prettier. I like to keep all my stuff in a single spiral-bound notebook or something like that, so that works for me. But having something to keep all the numbers that you're going to need in front of you can be a very useful thing. I don't recommend tracking things for the players. Let them get a taste for taking care of those things themselves, like their hit points or whatever gear they manage to accumulate. Some game masters go to the point of actually tracking how beat up the individual characters are, who gets what stuff. I've seen ledgers for those kind of campaigns. That's more than I choose to do, so your mileage may vary, of course. A couple of things that are useful, though, are things that you will be referring to about their characters. So having on that sheet things like their armor class, so that you can roll and see if you hit or not without having to constantly needle the players about their character stats. If you're going to use stealth against a passive perception statistic, writing down everybody's passive perception stat is useful. And that way you can surprise the players. You don't have to ask, hey, what's your passive perception? No reason, I'm just going to roll this. And if you have the numbers down, you don't have to do that. Just randomly rolling is fine. So that kind of a control sheet can be brilliant, can be very useful. You can also, if you want to prepare, list down all the monsters and challenges they're likely to have, arrange them in whatever way makes sense to you. Maybe keep track of how many hit points each creature has or resistances, things like that, so that they're notes for you and you can tick them off as the players get into combat and engage with the various creatures. It's also a good place to note effects that are going to happen, like if a creature is charmed or held and paralyzed or grappled. You can make a note of that yourself so you're not stumbling over these details and your players are reminding you, hey, wait a minute, I've got that character grappled. You have it on your sheet in front of you at all times. This is a level of organization that helps game masters, and quite honestly, I consider it essential to the role. Unless you have a really, really expansive mind that can keep track of a dynamic, ever-changing situation that combat often can be. Plus, keeping track of all the different things that your characters can do that are run by the players in front of you. There's a lot of minds going up against your creation, so it's a good idea to keep track of things like that. Beyond that, everything else is optional. The Game Master's screen. Some people see it as a very vital tool that has all kinds of charts facing the Game Master for things they might reference during game time. And possibly on the backside, it might even have player information that'll keep them from having to look through any books referencing things for their characters while they play. And that can be really good. On the other hand, it could be an impediment to gameplay. That means you have to look over your screen to see what the players are doing, and some people just don't like having that barrier between them and the rest of the group. The Game Master is a type of player. They are a participant in the game, after all, and screening yourself off from everybody else can seem to be artificial. What you gain out of it is not only access to all those rules and tables, but also a little bit of security that you can hide things from your players and then bring them out as a surprise as the game is unfolding. Or stop them to some extent from looking at your notes as you're referencing things. Some players can help themselves, and some of them actively love doing it. The peek behind the curtain can be kind of an intoxicating thing that some people just can't. But it is a form of cheating, and you're just basically cheating yourself out of surprise. So, again, your mileage may vary. I like to use a portable DM screen. I call it a clipboard, and I just basically put my stuff in a lot of engagements, especially like conventions, so that I can roam around the table if I have to. I can be mobile, and I have instant access to everything that I need. So that works out for me. It might work for you. Who knows? But that's something to think about. And then after that, it's whatever other resources are at hand. Do you use a battle mat, a gridded, washable mat that you can draw on with marker and erase at some point, and use that to make the world come to life before your players? Do you spring for the 3D terrain, or do you create your own 3D terrain so that you can create a visual feast for your players so they can see what their characters can see? And that really can help with immersion if you have the talent, if you have the time to do something like that. Do you use miniatures for all of the characters so that the players can identify with the character that they're going to be using in tactical engagements? Combats primarily, but sometimes they're interesting puzzles or if you have a lot of room, exploration, that you can watch the dungeon and the circumstances unfold before your player's eyes. And that can be really exciting. Are you going to get miniatures for all of the monsters? Quite honestly, this varies. Some people really go in for that and can spend an awful lot of money getting all the different props that are useful. I have spent way more money than I probably should on things like that, so I can break out those kind of things for my players. But back in the day, before I had the collection of things that I have, I even used chocolate-covered gummy bears for mobs of monsters. So if you were being menaced by a motley band of 15 goblins, I could break out the little chocolate-covered gummy bears for 15, and if you killed them, you could eat them. Nobody ever did, though. For some reason, my group is weird and think that chocolate-covered gummy bears are an abomination. So they actually ended up getting, white and hard and such. But what you use is up to you. You may not even decide that you need anything 3D. You don't need to draw anything out. You don't need monsters. You can describe it all as the game master and make it come to life for your players by just your description alone. And that does work for some groups very well. I, for one, if I have a minor encounter where spacing and positioning don't matter terribly, like a group beating on a single foe that, positional security doesn't really matter a lot, I will just describe it, and I will try to get on with the combat and the encounter quicker without having to reposition and worry. And some players are okay with that. Some, it's a distraction. It's a detraction away from the experience they could be having. So again, your mileage may vary tremendously. But once you have that combination of things ready, the preparation, what you've got, so you're comfortable with the amount of things that you have, your knowledge of the rules, and a fresh adventure to set in front of your group, you're probably ready. I'm not going to even talk about anything else like practicing voices or, having to deal with improv, because right now, this isn't the time to be fretting over things like that. It's time to get ready to run your game. So, you begin to run your game. Your players arrive. They have characters, or maybe they don't. Maybe you're going to create characters. And in this way, you can start what's called a session zero. A session zero is the very introduction to your game. It's a bit of a give and take. Sometimes your players will make their characters there in front of you. Some people really like to see the roles their characters or their players will make their characters to make sure everything's on the up and up. I've been hurt before. But more to the point, it's a chance for your players to kind of discuss the characters they want to play. And maybe there's a couple who are undecided, but once they find out what other people are interested in, that might help them make their decisions. Also, some people really believe in having a balanced party. So if one person is playing a fighter, and one person is playing a wizard, and another person is playing a thief, you might think, well, you need some healing. I'll play a cleric of some sort, or a paladin. There are plenty of people who are like that. There are some people who revel in not having a balanced group and therefore make the party work a little bit harder for their successes for want of some resource. And that's perfectly fine too. There's no right or wrong for any of this stuff, although there can be consequences and hardship if you choose to not worry about things like that. Personally, I prefer not to let the players, really negotiate out who's going to be what. I like people to play the characters they want to play, and I can adjust my game afterward. But that may be something you're going to do. And we can cover the strategies and everything about creating characters at a later time, too. But let's just say you start with pre-generated characters. You got one of those nifty starter sets, or maybe you made the characters in advance so that you can be ready to throw them into a game, which can be pretty cool. The characters are then passed over to the players who decide who wants to play which character. Hopefully everybody finds a character that they want, or maybe you can make little tweaks here and there that are cosmetic or don't make huge differences. The advantage to doing this, though, is that you can have characters that are ready to go right into the adventure, and for some games that have character backgrounds and things like that, you can tie that stuff into the adventure you plan on running. So that can be a real strength. But some people really love playing the characters that they have in their mind, too, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But if your session zero is a bit of a give and take, you're listening and you're taking input from your players. Maybe even ideas they have for backgrounds for their characters, where they came from, Again, we'll cover that in character creation, but this also gives you, the Game Master, an opportunity to inject your world into those characters. You can tell them about your world and the circumstances they're going to be starting in. You can possibly work together on the narrative of where these characters came from and weld them together in a group before you even have to go with a hackneyed old, you all find yourselves in the same tavern and then something happens. No, you can have your group start out knowing each other and being comfortable with each other, adventuring and risking their lives together for the sake of the story. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Getting through that first session 0, though, does usually give you the chance to tell people about your world, if they don't already know about it. What are the interesting things that are happening, and the plot elements that will open up the storyline. If, for instance, everybody is worried about the criminal gang that seems to be causing problems in the town, and your adventure is to deal with this criminal gang, this is the time to talk about it. Either this time or at the opening of the first true session. Now, after you get character creation out of the way and you've done your lore exposition and things like that, now you're actually going to be doing the thing that most people associate with the Game Master. Sitting at the head of the table and talking a lot, and sometimes rolling dice. And again, this is going to be very general because it's going to cover a variety of games. Not all games run like Dungeons and Dragons, so there are some that have their own unique features, but enough of them do that this should cover most games. If you want to know about a different game that doesn't quite use this particular pattern, this particular approach, let me know and I can cover that in another video. But here's the deal. You are, as the Game Master, going to have several hats. I've talked about this before. We've talked about the preparation and your fitness to be a referee for the game, meaning that anything that happens in the game ultimately filters to you to adjudicate. So, if somebody says, hey, if I throw myself off this wall, what's going to happen to me and can I maybe make it so it's not going to hurt? That's up to you to decide. Well, yes, as you look over the wall, maybe you don't have that set in stone, so you're like, yeah, you look over the wall and there's a hay cart right there. You can try to jump into the hay cart. Or it's going to be a fall down, say, 30 feet, so you're going to take a certain amount of damage. And no, there's really no way to take less if you're going to just fling yourself over this wall. They're going to be asking you questions like that, and that's your role as the referee. You're going to be basically telling them, yes, this is a circumstance that's going to happen, or no, this isn't really possible in this circumstance. And there's all kinds of different strategies and things that can be used for that. Again, another video. But that's one hat that you're going to wear, is the referee, because there's almost always going to be some question about, is this possible? Can I do this? How do I do this? And that you're using the rules basically to facilitate how the game works in your role as the referee. Now, that's just one. The most important hat you're probably going to wear, though, is the hat of the narrator. You are the eyes and ears of the characters. They don't see, they don't hear, they don't feel anything unless you give it to them. Unless you are playing a game that allows the players to help with the narration. For example, if your style is just to describe a blank room and it's the player's job to say there's a table in the room I'm going to jump on to give myself an advantage or to avoid the acid that's pouring into the room, some game masters revel in that kind of thing. Some of them are very simulationist and they will give you all the details. But there are plenty of games that allow player input of that nature. In this particular case, though, you set the stage. What's going on? What do the players see, hear, taste, feel, etc.? This should also be rooted in things their characters can understand. Like, for instance, you can explain how the characters, when they walk into a, we'll say, a tavern, they can smell the spilled ale, they can hear the excited chatter going through the room and maybe pick out a detail or two, possibly with a successful roll. They will see that the room is entirely occupied and that the majority of the people that are in the room are human workers from the fields, things like that. Those are details the players' characters would know. This also helps you to cement in the players' minds that their characters are part of the world. They know stuff that's going on that the players don't instinctively know, but you're going to tell them these things to kind of help them bridge that gap. Also, if you don't explain it or you don't say it, then the players are going to be ignorant to it. So a lot of the laying down of hooks and plot elements are squarely on your shoulders. And you have to make sure that you hit the bullet points that will tell the story so that your players can follow along. You don't always have to explain every detail, nor probably should you. You should encourage the players to investigate and to probe into the opening observations when they come to a new place, and let them poke around and let them ask the questions if that's the kind of game you're going to run. But at the same time, you should be giving in the kind of information that you give, because just by you being you at all times, you're absorbing constant sensory information, and an adventurer with a certain amount of skills should be parsing the things that are vital for them to know for survival or for the furtherance of their goals. So that's your narrator job, and it's one that's going to keep coming up again and again and again and again. Anytime something new happens or the players decide their characters are going to go someplace else, you are the one who is going to paint that new picture of where they're going as a narrator. Another role that you're going to have, and this is the one a lot of people struggle with, is you are everybody except for the player characters themselves. So you cover the friendly non-player characters that are in the game world, and you put people of interest in the world to give the players things to work off of. Some consideration should be made that they make sense within your world and the story you want to make. For instance, if you were going to do a mystery, a supernatural haunting of some sort, you probably should make the person that's being haunted or that would come to the party looking for relief, and you should have some thought to that character. Some game masters like to give characters like that a voice, and they can vary their tone and pitch up. It's something that becomes better with practice, I assure you. But that is a consideration some people have. You are also the adversaries, and that means that you can be somebody who doesn't care about the player characters, or that actively dislikes them or wishes them harm. Understanding the motivations of your characters and making those evident to your players by the words and actions of the characters themselves, pretty important, because that gives out a lot of information too. Sometimes more information than your narration is what those characters say and how they say it. So that can be a large element. Do you have to do the voices? Do you have to speak as the characters? No, you don't. You can use third party and just describe what happens and describe what is said without being in character. And some game masters don't feel comfortable jumping into character, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just an element of style. One style is not any better than any others. And you may end up changing your style as you get experience and run games. So these are elements of the toolbox that you can grow and learn and develop. But it is a good thing to know who the key people are in any given situation. If you create somebody out of the blue, the players could very well fixate on a character that you just created. Write that stuff down on your control sheet. Be able to make references to it. It strengthens your world. It makes things more real for the players. They can learn to trust that your world has permanence. It has people that matter and exist and can be found and repurposed again and again. And that's really useful to a game. Another thing that's kind of a hat that we game masters wear, and this one I think is undervalued tremendously, is that we are also the guide. And by that I mean there are things that can't be conveyed necessarily by the narrator. There are things that can't be governed by the referee, who has to kind of stay a neutral party. But sometimes you can kind of describe the character's urges, natures, and feelings in a way that makes sense to the characters, and therefore you can translate that to the players, that from what your character knows, this is true. From what your character understands in this world, anybody would know this is a common danger that maybe you don't get, but your characters probably would. And sometimes you need to do that to bridge the gap. More veteran players, maybe less so. But it is kind of a rough thing to expect that your player character only knows as much as your player. especially in more modern narrative games. They came from somewhere, they lived up to this point, presumably trained in their profession, so they would have heard stories about things like it can be dangerous to go pursuing a goblin into their caves because there's usually a lot more of them. That's one of those common sense things that almost you as a game master should give out in your position as guide to kind of help the players to interface with their characters a little bit better. Some people absolutely don't think that's important and that the players are learning as their characters are learning. I find that it works better in more modern games that have a more narrative influence and that the characters are more of an investment for the players to create. If it's something you just dashed off in 5 to 10 minutes, not as important because that character doesn't have a great deal of significance. But in a more modern game with more narrative elements and more involved character creation, that might be something that you want to also do. This should not ever be, however, a position where you take control of the player's characters. It's a guide, not a backup driver. So, it can be very useful. So, you start out as the narrator for your players. You describe the circumstance. You frame the scene. You maybe describe some moving elements within the scene for the players. Then, what is game mastery? Really, it is back and forth. That is the soul of roleplay, is back and forth. You say something, the players say how they will react, you describe what the effects are of what the players do and what continues to happen throughout the scene. If it's combat, you are the one who dictates the back and forth. You narrate it to make sense to your players so that they can imagine the situation as it is unfolding, as the dice dictate or whatever game system you use has some means of resolution. That's how you give that over to the players. And usually by wearing all of the different hats at various times. You open as the narrator. Then after that, the players may ask some questions that you may, as a referee, make some rulings on. After that, they may meet up with some people that you have in a given scene. It's pretty rare where you start out tabula rasa on a flat plane with nobody to talk to and nothing to do. And most players will use the resources of the world around them, the people to talk to, things to buy, things to move around and position and manipulate as part of what their characters do. And that's all good play. That's something that may sometimes surprise you with how creative they can be, or sometimes wanting to go in a direction other than what you had intended, and that's fine. That's what players do. They test boundaries sometimes, and hopefully they're enjoying the world around you and get enough investment in their characters that they'll eventually want to do the things that matter to their characters. If you did pre-generated characters, they should already have some of those wants that the characters will work to fill. If you didn't pre-generate their characters, then you should pay note to what the players wanted their characters to do and try to help them to work into that through the storyline. So, the give and take is going on. You set the scene, the players are reacting. What do? You use the rules as a lens to dictate how you're going to look at the situation and how you can resolve anything the players try to do. Is it something so simple that anyone could do it? Probably don't need any kind of a role. You can just decide. As a game master, you can always just decide, yeah, you go ahead and you do that. If it's something that's dicey, that might succeed and might not, but really doesn't matter, more often than not, I would just say let them do it. If there's no real struggle and there's no profit to be made off of it, or even if there is a struggle, but there's really nothing compelling about it. Like, if you're going to try to scale a chain link fence, okay, there's an element of a possibility of failing, but if you have all the time in the world to do it, you'll eventually get over that chain link fence more often than not, unless you have some serious impediment that would stop you. So, let the players do it. Just let them get over it. Just move on. Don't break things up with dice rolling. Save the dice for things that are important, or whatever conflict resolution system you have in the game that you play. But as a game master, you can do that. You have control of your game and can determine what is going to happen and what is not. If you start losing that control in some way, shape, or form, well, that's another video. But as a game master, you have the referee hat. You can say what happens and should be able to do it pretty much without question. As far as, again, interacting with other people, bear in mind that NPCs can be people too and may have their own goals and motivations, and that should help you kind of drive what they do. I would also caution for young up-and-coming or old up-and-coming, let's face it, first-time game masters, doesn't matter if you're older or younger, except that you have a lot more life experience if you're older and may have some other ideas. But you come into the game at a different place, but when you first come into the world as a game master, it can seem a little frightening. One thing I can tell you, make your characters live and breathe as people or as monsters, as, you know, behaving monstrously, but very few creatures want to die. So if they are put into a position where death is likely, they will probably try to get out of that situation. And if they are at a disadvantage, they will probably try to do things to even out those advantages. That's as much as I'm going to touch on with monster and character activities, but it's a useful thing to think about things like that when it comes to your game. Finally, you've gotten through a scenario. Players are hopefully excited. They maybe had some things that didn't go their way. Maybe things went crushingly their way. You flow on. This, you take into account what the players want to do, and then you lead them to the next thing that they do. Or you let them lead themselves, but hopefully you are comfortable with the environment that you created, that you are ready with the next thing that they come to, and can describe it as a narrator and let them react to the world around them, and the world will react back, and you have the give and take again, all over. Rinse and repeat. There are, of course, intricacies in that. This is only a very general guide. Combat is its own monster. So is portraying different NPCs, and even portraying the mindsets of monsters. But that also comes with experience. Your perspective, your experience, and you're just building that if you're new to this game. So allow yourself to make mistakes. Allow yourself to occasionally see that maybe this didn't work so well, or maybe the players seemed like they were a little out of touch at this point, and work to try to improve your game even as you're running it. If you see that a player is disaffected from a whole situation, work to involve them, draw them in when you can. That is a way that you can try to make sure everybody's having a good time and feeling like they matter and feel like they are being engaged. Read the room as you go. And don't be afraid to occasionally scrap something that you thought was a good idea and place something that seems like a better idea that might make for a better experience. Sometimes that even comes from your players. Just listening to what they say may give you an idea. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought of it from that point. That could be really useful. It can be most effective if you can wait to change things until the next session, but yeah, by all means, incorporating in better ideas than something that maybe you hadn't considered through all that well might be in your best interest as a game master. Now, the end of the game. You've gone through several scenarios, several encounters possibly, or maybe one big one huge combat, say. When it's all done, and your players are, acknowledging they've got their stuff, that they've divvied up loot maybe, or maybe you're the kind of person who gives out experience at the end of every session so that your players can track their progress and when they're ready to level up or achieve something. Hopefully they thank you for the experience, but it's not always the case. Sometimes players tend to take off and take the game for granted a little bit. But if they had fun, if they enjoyed themselves and they're chit-chattering and they're excited and they can't wait to get back for another game, pat yourself on the back. You did a great job. The players enjoyed themselves even if they don't thank you for the game. And if they do, it's a great feeling. But if you got through the session, you did good. Nobody flipped the table or got mad and whatever. If you had a complete session, great. You did wonderfully. If something didn't go quite your way, note it. Write it down on your GM control sheet, something that maybe bothered you, a rule you didn't like, or something that a player has in their character that you want to research, or something like that. Maybe take an opportunity to make yourself better. Look at things, consider how might I have gone about this differently? What is a weakness in my game that I think I can work on and try to get better for the next game? Maybe this idea, looking at it critically try to get an outsider's perspective, because you've just had these outsiders from your own thoughts, engaging with your ideas, what seemed to work? What seemed to line up? Were there mistakes that were made because they didn't have enough information? I can make sure I illustrate things better. Maybe the players have some preconceptions that aren't really working well in the game. Like they feel like they have to kill everything, and you're not the game master who's going to make them kill every monster. Maybe they can talk their way out of situations, or you're going to put them into situations that they can't just hack their way through, and they probably should have some warning that this isn't always going to work. How would you do that? Maybe through the words of an NPC who watches them and says, maybe your strategy isn't quite sound there. Or maybe it's a whispered dream from the divines, or what have you. As a game master in your role as guide, you can also give out a little bit of a friendly little reminder here and there that, technically going into a store and threatening to kill the store owner who they think is cheating them is technically against the law, might help the players to deal with the realism of your world a little bit. So then, again, the game is done, everything, you're packing everything up, everything is at rest, you're probably going to feel a little drained. Honestly, most game masters put out quite a bit of energy into their game, and it goes out to the players. It's nice when the players give that energy back from their characters, but you may feel a little bit drained. Know that you did a good thing. It is a type of exercise, and gaming energy is a muscle. Just like anything else, you can develop it and make it stronger. The longer you do this, the better you'll feel after a game, especially when you've had some successes under your belt, and you'll want to go back to that taste of, I ran a really good game and my players really had a great time. It's out there. You'll get there, but, maybe you feel a little rocky after that first time, like, beating yourself up over something that didn't work, or you came across a player who is presenting a problem. Those can be addressed, but if you have tried, you legitimately tried your best to make a good game and run a good game for your friends or for these people at this convention or whatever, you did a good job. You tried. Maybe it didn't all go the way you wanted to. Maybe it went fantastically. Get back on that horse. Do it again. A one-time game master is a dilettante, somebody who just tried something. If you have to do it more than once, and if you do it a lot of times, you'll eventually become a veteran. You'll be the kind of person who can sit in front of a room full of people and you can tell them, this is how it's going on. Hit me. What do you got? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Come on, give it to me. I want to give this back to you. I want to give you this energy. I want to give you this world. That comes with experience. That love of the game comes with exposing yourself to it again and again. I hope very strongly that you get there. And I hope that someday I get to play for you. Because who knows? It's a crazy world and it could happen. But those are my most general notes about how to game master successfully. If you can get through that game, you can learn from it, get better every time, you can have a fantastic, fantastic hobby that will reward you many, many, many times over from the effort that you put into it. Game mastering is where it starts to really turn into a commitment of excellence and wanting to make sure everybody has a great time. So, welcome, Game Master. I hope things go well for you. If you have any problems along the way, come see me, the Dungeon Tutor. I'd be happy to explain anything that you're having problems with and give you some tips and advice along the way. I'd advise you, if you are interested in such a thing, just subscribe to my channel, leave a thumbs up, hit the notification button, and you can contact me whenever you need. Leave a comment on any of my videos. That'll help me to direct and respond to you, or possibly to inspire a new video that will directly address that issue that you're having, because odds are somebody else has had that too, and it might be able to help a lot of people. And ultimately, if you know somebody else who wants to be a game master and they just feel alone and they don't feel sure, feel free to share this with other people. This is how, hopefully, you can help a game master get a little stronger with the words and encouragement of another person who's done it and been there. I'd certainly like to do that for you. So, feel free to share the channel. And until next time, my friends, I am the Dungeon Tutor, and I thank you for joining me on this journey and hope that gaming is a wonder and a joy in your life that makes it so much richer as it has mine. Until the next time, my friend, farewell.